So before we start here, you're going to notice that some of the game footage that is used in this review is different from some other game footage. Now, I'm going to be extremely transparent why this is. The reason for that is that some of my game footage was actually corrupted and or did not save at all. Now, you could be wondering why I couldn't just go back and replay those parts. Unfortunately, I did not have those parts saved in the game files. So in order for me to get back to those points, I would have had to replay them all over again. And unfortunately, I just did not have enough time to do so. So I asked some people on YouTube if I can use their footage. Not for gameplay, but for cutscenes. Because I believe the ones that I lost out on were chapters 1 and chapter 12. And those were the two that I just couldn't go back to no matter what. So I needed to use those for cutscene purposes only. And I think only one gameplay scene in chapter 12. You'll see what you'll know what it is when we get to it. But again, I'm not trying to rip anybody off. I'm not trying to take anybody's credit. Down here, you'll see in the bottom of the screen and on the description who that belongs to and where that belongs, or where to go if you want to follow, that person. So I just want to be extremely transparent here because I don't want someone to come at me and say that I stole someone's footage, because that's not what I was trying to do. Nugget, Bakamitai, Majima, disco dancing, men in diapers. These are the moments that seem to have been most associated with the game series known as Yakuza. Now, while I do enjoy these moments, and while I also find myself laughing at how ridiculous it can become, personally, I feel like these moments have sadly overshadowed what I find to be some of the most consistently excellent games in gaming today, hosting some amazing music, some fantastic stories, memorable characters, addicting gameplay, constant innovation, and yes, very, very humorous moments. And in the coming weeks and months, I would like to go through all 8 mainline games, and maybe even some side games, to truly show how amazing this game series is. And hopefully encourage those who have maybe only seen the memes or only played a single game to go in and experience this fantastic franchise. Now, of course, reviewing a game series spanning over 8 mainline games is no easy feat. And many have already tried, many have already done it, but I thought, why not throw my hat in the ring to give my own perspective and view each game from a more objective standpoint than what I viewed these games originally when I played them, which wasn't very long ago, funny enough. And hopefully, if I can explain just why I love this series so much, and if I do a good job showing the ins and outs, the pros and cons, I may just be able to give you a new addiction as well. So, enough fluff, enough padding. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to Yakuza. So before we begin with the review proper, I should state that yes, just as the thumbnail says, this is the original version of Yakuza 1 released in 2005, not Kiwami. Kiwami, while overall it does have many similarities with OG 1, specifically in the story department, I feel could use its own video explaining the changes, explaining the pros and cons of said changes, and many other things that it changes basically outside of just revamping 1. So that will come at a later date. Basically, I'll be doing it in production order, so expect that right about when I do 0, maybe before, maybe after. Okay, is that fine? All right, let's keep going then. Our story begins on October 1st, 1995. We see a man on the ground shot in the head. Police come in and arrest a black-haired man in a gray suit, and that man, we find, is Kiryu Kazuma, a man who doesn't care about your fashion standards because no matter what he does, and no matter what he wears, he still looks better than you do. We then flash back to the day prior where we get a bit more context about the opening scene. As it turns out, Kiryu did not kill this man, who we come to find out is Sohei Dojima, Kiryu's boss. It was this man, Akira Nishikiyama, Kiryu's sworn brother, who killed Dojima due to Dojima attempting to assault this woman named Yumi, who is Kiryu's and Nishikiyama's, who we'll just call Nishiki from here on out, love interest. And we later find out that all three of them were also raised in the exact same orphanage, but don't worry too much about her, she won't be very important. Sorta. So, TLDR, bang bang boom, Kiryu is now in prison for murder for 10 whole years, which then, that's where the story picks up in 2005. In that time, a lot has seemingly changed in the hometown of Kamurocho. First off, he was expelled from the Tojo clan, which is the boss of the clan that Kiryu is from. Don't worry if that sounds a little confusing, it makes a lot more sense later on. But it also seems that Yumi has vanished into thin air, and Nishikiyama is a very different person than he used to be. So on top of that, he also has to wrap his head around a completely different city from a decade ago. Everything from telephones to way people communicate, the way people dress, everything is completely different. And along the way, he meets a plucky little girl named Haruka. I really hope you like her, because she is not going away anytime soon. And while all that's happening, it seems a conspiracy is brewing within the Tojo clan over a missing 10 billion yen, which, you guessed it, seemingly vanished into thin air. So, while all that's happening, Haruka gets kidnapped, rescued, kidnapped again, run over by a car. Wait, that doesn't happen yet. Just forget that I said that. Anyways, we not only find out that Yumi is alive and well, but during the decade whilst Kiryu's in prison, she also got kinda busy. Got married to this man named Jingu, and had a kid, who we find out is Haruka. Yep, she is her daughter, and apparently the pendant she gave to Haruka before she just dropped her off at an orphanage, kinda fucked up, holds the key to finding the missing 10 billion yen, which, as it turns out, isn't the Tojo clan's money at all. In fact, it's Jingu's, who we also find out wanted to kill both Haruka and Yumi to further his political gain. Father of the year, I know. So Kiryu has to worry about all of this, on top of protecting Haruka, fending off the Chinese mafia, hoping to quell the rumblings of a Tojo clan civil war, and also probably getting shot. Twice. Don't worry, he'll get used to those. And on top of all of that, he somehow has to try and make Nishiki come back to his senses, which sadly ends up like that. So Kiryu comes out unscathed, somehow. Haruka is protected, somehow. Yumi dies, explosion, and Kiryu revokes his fourth chairman status. Did I forget to mention that, by the way? And everything seems to be at peace. Kiryu is able to walk off into the sunset with Haruka now being his newly adopted niece. The fucking end. And that, my friends, was just the main story. In this condensed summary, I didn't even get into the whole stuff with Majima, Date, Club Shine, Reina, Shimano, Shintaro Kazuma, all of whom not only get established in this game, but stay as pretty much relevant characters, if not mentioned characters, for the rest of the series. Now, admittedly, for as wild as I portrayed the story, it is not as hectic as it may come off. In fact, for the 13 chapters this game is allowed, it paced itself pretty okay. In fact, it even allows for plenty of world-building moments that will eventually come into play later in the series, such as the Omi Alliance, the Tojo clan, even the position of chairman that Kiryu held for less than a few days comes into play in pretty much every single game afterwards. You're going to come to realize as the reviews go on that in some weird way, nothing in Yakuza is done by complete accident. A character can, and usually does, appear in this game that could return even just for a small cameo in way later games. And I'm not talking about just main characters. I'm talking any of these guys can come into play way late into the series. Not to spoil anything so far, but I can tell you right now that a few characters in 1 actually do make a cameo all the way in 7. That is some long-term booking if I have ever heard it. Now, the story proper, as you can probably guess, is a mystery, all surrounding the missing 10 billion yen. As the story unfolds, you get plenty of twists, plenty of turns, plenty of backstabs, plenty of regular stabs, and plenty of revelations that pertain to not only who took the money, but also why they took the money. And if I'm gonna be honest, I find it one of the weaker stories of the franchise. Granted, I am willing to give it some leeway due to the fact that it is the first game of the franchise and it's still technically trying to find its footing, though at the same time I do feel there are plenty of moments in this game where it sort of just feels like they didn't know how to connect one thing to another and left out some details, glossed over other details, and then there's times where, well, let's just call it what it is, it feels like there's padding, such as the fact that do we really have to have that mission with Date's daughter as a main story mission, or do we really need to go through the entire runaround fetch quest for the Shangri-La card membership? I don't know. It's almost too blatant in its purpose of padding in itself at times, and while I don't necessarily mind the missions that much, given the fact that they're pretty short in duration, I would be lying if I said I didn't feel the game slowed down quite a bit and got a tad bit boring in parts during those sections of the game. Though, why it also got a little bit boring, we'll get to when we get to the actual gameplay mechanics. Now, of course, we can't talk about the story without talking about the characters, and one of those characters being our main guy, Kiryu. And I really, really like this guy. Even from word go, there is just something very magnetic about this guy. And granted, to some, he can come off as overly stoic and maybe even flat, though I blame that somewhat on the dub, but we'll get to that. But you do come to find that he isn't some wannabe tough guy putting up a facade to just seem tougher than he really is. In fact, you find that this man is an extremely honorable individual who believes in doing good and helping those who are better than what their exterior leads you to believe. In fact, he has shown many times in this game alone, at least in the main story at least, that he willingly gives up his time to help others. At times, like with missions regarding the florist, he does get something out of them, but you can tell not all is done with a completely selfish cause. Of course, he is not without his flaws. In fact, one of the biggest flaws shown during the ending is where he basically almost abandoned Haruka because he seemingly, at least to himself, lost everything. Now, of course, he does come through in the end because you can't just have the main character just saying, hey, kid, fuck you. But it's a nice reminder that Kiryu does still have needs and wants like a normal person. But speaking of which, can't have Kiryu without his sidekick Haruka, who, whilst she doesn't have a whole ton to do in this game, other than basically be the MacGuffin, she does at least have a fun personality to go with it. Usually I hate the spunky kid character that's way smarter than some of the adults in any sort of media, but I think she hits that perfect middle ground between being a kid with a lot to learn, but also being smart for her age. There's plenty of moments with her that you feel that she isn't just one note. She isn't just there to annoy the audience. She isn't just there to exposit random BS. She isn't just there to be, again, the MacGuffin. She feels a bit more fleshed out. And of course, she is going to be a recurring character for the rest of the series, so I'm actually really glad they do what they do with her. And I won't lie, at least to me, the little relationship she has with Kiryu is just, it's adorable. You can't call it anything else but adorable. But we can't talk about the daughter and leave out the mother, can we? And though sadly there really isn't much to talk about with Yumi, She kind of just is. She is technically the main catalyst for the entire story, but we spend so little time with her in this game that she almost becomes sort of an afterthought towards the end of the game, where she's revealed as some brilliant mastermind behind the pendant and the 10 billion yen, which just seemingly comes out of nowhere. Though granted, she does have help from outside sources such as Kazuma towards the end, but it really does feel like, I don't know, she goes from cowering in the bed, almost shot by a henchman of Jingu's, to this, some mastermind, basically. And I don't know, for me, it's just too much of a jump, and it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. Sadly, that also goes for our main villain of the game, Nishiki. Though with him, it's not so much a jump in logic, as it's more just a feeling that this game probably should have established his jealousy and animosity towards Kiryu a bit better. Because it does sort of feel like he goes from being this scared, cowardly man who's saved from the brink from someone he considered a brother to some violent psychopath who will just kill anybody and anyone in his way. Though I would be lying if towards the end they do give us some dialogue that kind of hints that there was always this underlying feeling of, jealousy. And even towards the end, there's also this underlying feeling that Nishiki might not fully believe in the cause he's fighting for, and he might not totally be gone to the psychotic side, which does actually play into Kiryu's personality of not wanting to give in on anybody, even though it's quite obvious at points he may just be too far gone. I do, however, think it's not necessarily as negative as it might come off. The idea that this man who Kiryu gave up everything for, only for him to become someone almost unforgivable in nature, is still a fun dynamic. I just feel that, at least in this game itself, there could have been more said. Or maybe a little bit, maybe more of a mean streak to Nishiki that we didn't see. Of course, this is something they go into in the remake, and maybe even a little bit in Zero, but we'll get to the problems that those bring to the table when they do, and we'll also get into the pros that those bring to the table when we do. Then we have Jingu. Not really much to say about him. You'll come to find with Yakuza, the series, that you have final bosses and you have main villains, which kind of sounds a bit weird, especially because I just called Nishiki the main villain. Well, technically, Nishiki's more the final boss. He's more the guy you're training to fight against at the end. Because Jingu really is more of the quote-unquote main villain, because it's his money that everyone's fighting for. It's his doing that all this stuff is happening. It's him that, he's trying to kill Yumi and Haruka and putting Kiryu through all this hell. But in the end, he kind of comes off as nothing more than just again, I really hate to say it, but it really comes off more as just a generic, haha, evil bad guy. I am just doing this for the money and to become more powerful. Granted, it's not like you can't do something interesting with that motivation, because technically that's what Nishiki's trying to do as well. It's just it comes off more generic and stereotypical. Again, I can almost give it a little bit of leeway because it is the main game that started it all, and it's a bit dated, but at the same time, there's only so much leeway I can give, and let's be honest, Jingu just isn't he isn't very interesting. Now, besides the main cast, we do have a plethora of side characters, such as Date, a no-nonsense detective who just wants to what's best for Kamurocho and has a pretty cruddy relationship with his daughter, though I will say I do like that dynamic because, in a way, it almost mirrors what happens with Kiryu and Haruka towards the end of the series, only not as dramatic and not as crazy. Plus, Date's just a fun guy, he has a spirit about him where, yeah, he's old, yeah, he's probably past his prime ×2, but he still wants to give it his all, and I like that about him. And the friendship that he has with Kiryu is also very nice. He likes Kiryu, he can understand that Kiryu's a very honorable guy, and he sees some respect in him, even though technically he is the guy, who took him in. Then we have Shintaro Kazuma, who honestly seemed like he was going to play a much bigger role in this game. But he is the guy who raised Kiryu and Nishiki when they joined up in the Yakuza. He also owned the orphanage where they all lived, apparently. And for some reason in this game, they just revealed that he also killed Kiryu's parents, which is why he went to the orphanage in the first place, because that orphanage is where he sends all the kids who he orphaned because he killed their parents. Admittedly, it's kind of silly how they just thrust that into the ether, basically, with no real build-up, no real tension, no real foreshadowing, no real anything. Granted, it's kind of nice, I guess, but it feels kind of silly, and I feel like that's something they're going to expand upon when we get to the remake. And then we have Majima. He's not the one from Zero. If you're coming in with the expectation of having this guy here, you are sorely mistaken. I kind of like him because this game, again, this is obviously the game that introduced him. They introduced him in a way that I feel kind of really cements what I like about him, where he's a psycho at times, but he also has this weird sense of honor, this code of ethics that he doesn't like to break. And with this game, granted, he drives a fucking bulldozer through an entire building, but he still has ethics. And I feel like they really gave it their all to show that. Presentation-wise, I think that the game very much still holds up. It's not fantastic, it's not amazing, but for what it is and for the time it came out, I still think it's a very nice looking PS2 game. It doesn't look jank, it doesn't look gross, it doesn't look, well, dated. And I think it very much helps the game in its atmosphere. I do really like the aesthetic of this game. Everything kind of looks grimy, everything looks almost, as I would expect, lived in. Everything looks straight out of like a crime movie. It looks really nice. I like the vibrant colors of the red light districts. I love the almost fog-like vignette that the whole thing has, almost like you're watching a movie in certain scenes. And that also kind of goes into the character design. You get to see somebody like a Kiryu in this game, and you get to see where his character design started, and I really like it. Granted, he does look very blocky, he looks very triangular in some instances, but I think it's okay for what it looks like. And another thing that I really like is the soundtrack in the game. Trumpets, electric guitar, even some minor vocals in the background. And of course, this extends to the boss themes, which shout out to Nishiki's theme at the very end. A little bit overly synthesized for sure, but hey, PS2 era, and even with that being the case, I still find it to be, personally, one of my favorite boss themes. And of course, since we're talking about the American version of Yakuza 1, everybody and their mother who has been into this series for a while knows about the dub. And since this section's about presentation, the dub is still part of the presentation, so let's talk about it. So Yakuza 1 was the first, and until 7, Judgment doesn't count technically, only Yakuza game to ever have an English dub. Why? Well, let's face it, it's not very good. It's not a very good dub. And, you know, God bless them for trying, but the direction that these voice actors were given is just all sorts of off. It really does feel like they had a voicing director that probably didn't really get the material, or the pointers that they got from the studio were maybe just a little lackluster. It really does feel like they didn't know how to translate some of these things and how to translate some of these lines into English without it sounding awkward. You know, some of the examples I'll I'll just show him on the screen.
All right then, the final showdown.
But those are nothing but excuses. In the end, it's always just for you.
I found it at last. My money.
And the unfortunate fact is that they're not that bad. Like, they're bad, but they're not the level of awful that some people could imagine or some people have given its reputation. There's plenty of points where it's very bad. I'm going to be honest with you. But at the same time, I think for the material that they're given, specifically Kiryu, he does a very okay job. And I'm so glad that they brought him back way later. And of course, over a decade of experience under his belt really does show. And I'm glad because he does a fantastic job. But we'll get to that when we get to 7. And besides him, I think Haruka does an okay job. I think Date, even though they're making him do this ridiculous detective voice, like, hey, Sonny.
Unfortunately, I don't think that'll happen. I'll try it out with Saya and see what family life is like.
Even then, I think he's all right. Of course, it's many of the side characters and the sub-story characters that are just awful. And as much as I hate to admit it, Majima, played by Mark Hamill, is just the shits. It is the absolute shits.
Long time no see, Kazuma-chan. Delightful to see you. It just fills me up with joy.
But what does this all mean, really? The story can be great, but I can watch a movie for that. The characters can be fun, but I can go read a book. The voice acting can be bad, but I can just go watch a different anime. This is a game, goddammit. So, what is the gameplay like? Well, let me tell you. So, the game itself is a very simple beat-em-up. You got your punches, you got your kicks, you got a grab. You got your heat actions, which, if you're expecting any of these... No, it's mainly just stepping on people, smashing them into stuff. Nothing crazy, but it gets the job done. And they work mostly. Now here's where it gets kinda jank. This game has a lock-on feature, quote unquote, and the reason I say that is because it locks on, sure, but it doesn't lock on to an enemy. Oh, it'll lock on to them when they're in front of you, but say that enemy moves out of the way, as they do later in the game. Kiryu, if he starts an attack, he is committed to that attack, and there's no way to make him cancel out of that attack. Once Kiryu is committed to a combo, you have to follow through with that combo. Yes, granted, you can technically cancel by just not pressing a button, but it leaves you way open. Plus, to turn around and to lock on again, it basically makes the lock on feature all but pointless. In fact, take a look at this footage here. This is not me fucking up. This is not me having the emulator fuck up. This is not the controller I had fucking up. This is literally the game not being able to register the fact that I don't want to just hit a wall. And this is just one of the examples. And this is during a boss fight. This happens all the time in mob fights too. And if you're in a mob fight with like 5 of the biggest enemies that they've got in the game, and they can all juggle your ass, yeah, you're pretty much screwed. Granted, yes, you can get out of it, you can run, you can do all this stuff, but at the same time, that shouldn't be. And there's only so much I can say that it's the first game. They just didn't know how to do it yet. I can't give that much leeway when these games were already out on the market. And overall, it just feels slow and janky. This game's lock-on and the game's janky nature and the way that you're not even able to cancel out of some of these things, it kind of just makes you feel like an idiot. It really does. It makes you feel like an idiot when you're trying so hard to hit this guy, yet every single punch you land leads you just running into the dark. And that's pretty much the worst part of the combat, and I think the worst part of the game, which, granted, it's not even like it's that bad to where I'm just not having fun and I'm just tired and I just want to go home. It's not that bad. It's just the jank of it just happens so often, and the points of locking on just happen so often that you just feel like the game is not being played right, or the game is missing something here and there to make this feel a little bit better. Honestly, I can't wait till we get to the second game to see how they improved on this, because I hear that the second game, the vanilla version of the second game, is way better at this. But at least with one, it's sadly a no-go. And I can say I was able to get through it, but that's only because I wanted to do this review. Most people playing this casually, I don't even think they would be able to get to the first boss fight without getting annoyed as hell by the stupid lock-on feature. And again, it doesn't even seem that bad. It just feels wrong. But, of course, if you want to give it a try, I would suggest it. Maybe you'll have a bit more fun than I do, and maybe you'll be able to get a hang of the lock-on, or lack thereof, when you try it yourself. And, well, it couldn't be a PS2 era game without it trying at least something new with the gameplay. And yeah, it has this. It sucks. That's all I can say, is that it sucks. The movement's terrible. I feel like I can't aim for shit. I feel that every single bullet that you try and shoot just seems to kind of vanish into the ether. And even though I didn't die here, I really feel like I should have multiple times. It's just bad. It's just really, really bad. But what is there to do outside of fighting, you might be asking? Well, you might be thinking that since this is the first game, there isn't much to do. But that is where you would be wrong, my friends. You can go to batting cages, you can go to UFO catchers, you can drive yourself into crippling debt with roulette and baccarat, or you can do some of these fine mini games, which I'm not allowed to show, because if I do, well, YouTube has a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, and I probably won't be here by the end of the month. And of course, you can go and woo the ladies at your local cabaret club. And if that's not enough for you, well, you can always just talk about Fight Club. And if even all that's not enough for you, you still got your sub-stories, you still got your time attack, you still got your boss rush, you still have premium adventure. This game has a lot to do. As an entire package, I believe that Yakuza 1, the original, the OG, the vanilla, as we have in front of us, is okay. It's not fantastic, it's not amazing, it's okay. But I will say that for its first outing, it does overachieve. Everything from the mini games to the difference in play styles towards the end of the games, as much as I hate it, to the sub-stories, to even the little thing with Haruka's trust that I didn't mention because it doesn't really matter, but even that, a lot of it does feel overachieving, and I feel that because of that, this game really helped put the building blocks on what I believe will become one of the best video game series of all time. And as a whole, even now, I would suggest trying it out just to see where the series came from. But the jankiness of the fighting controls can sometimes get to you. The slow pacing of certain parts can sometimes be a bit boring. Hell, even some of the cutscenes where you just can't even pause it. You can't pause it, you can't skip it. You're stuck there until the cutscene ends. There's certain little things about this game that kind of pick at you, but I think if you can look past that, you'll find if nothing else, a very fun experience, especially if you are trying to get into this series for the first time. And that's really all I have to say about Yakuza OG 1. Next up is Yakuza 2, and I'm excited to see that one because I've been told by plenty of people that it is one of, if not the best in the series. I don't know for sure just yet because I've never played the OG version, but we'll see about that. As for now, I do very much thank you all for watching, and I hope y'all have a fantastic day. See ya. Oh, hello. This is the end slate. Thanks for watching again. My first YouTube video game review. I'm doing this all unscripted. It's quite new to me. But yeah, so YouTube tells me to do this every once in a while so I can make people watch my other videos. So go ahead. They're all right there. Maybe leave a comment. Tell me what I can improve on, because I know this wasn't my best, but hey, it's my first time trying, so gotta give it a shot, huh? I don't really have much to say here. I mean, just go watch that video, or go watch that video. Go watch any of them. They're all fantastic. I mean, I've got nothing else to say. So, peace.
Kazuma-san, she's a guy.